Welcome back to the Fairshake Files. In Part 2, we examined the official story that convicted Charles Manson, the prosecution's Helter Skelter narrative, an apocalyptic race war supposedly inspired by the Beatles, led by a messianic cult leader who commanded absolute control over his followers. Today, in Part 3, we begin to dismantle that story. We'll trace the fissures beneath the prosecution's case and uncover motives that were far less theatrical, but far more believable. Motives rooted in drug debts, criminal rivalries, and a climate of fear that turned a group of drifters into killers. We proceed with respect for the victims and their families. What emerges is not prophecy, but panic. Not a race war foretold by rock lyrics, but a series of desperate crimes born of greed, addiction, and survival. This is Part 3. Cracks in the Foundation. The Helter Skelter narrative offered the prosecution a simple solution to a complex legal problem. Charles Manson hadn't personally killed anyone at either crime scene. To convict him of first-degree murder, they needed conspiracy, a motive so large it could turn philosophy into law. A personal dispute would never tie him to the violence. An apocalyptic race war could. That idea became the bridge connecting Manson to every knife, every bullet, every word written in blood. Legally, it worked. Publicly, it became legend. But when we set aside the courtroom script and follow the evidence, a quieter, more plausible story begins to surface. One about a failed record deal, a prosecutor's ambition, and a sequence of crimes that make far more sense in the light of day. Before the murders, Manson believed music would save him. Through Beach Boy Dennis Wilson, he met producer Terry Melcher, son of Doris Day. Melcher visited Spahn Ranch, listened to Manson's songs, and discussed a possible album. But the deal evaporated. Melcher walked away, citing Manson's volatility. The rejection shattered Manson's self-image. He had promised his followers fame. When that dream collapsed, his preaching turned bitter. The man who once sang about freedom began to talk about vengeance against the people who had taken what he thought was his due. It was the first clear crack in his reality. When ambition failed, ideology took its place. And that vengeance had a specific address. The house at 10,050 Cielo Drive, where Sharon Tate and her friends were murdered, was not random. It was the house Terry Melcher had been renting until just months earlier. Manson had been there. He knew exactly whose home it had been. If the prosecution insisted the victims were random, the counter-argument is that the house was the target. A direct message of terror aimed at the man who rejected him, regardless of who lived there now. When the killings came, prosecutors faced a different kind of failure: how to convict a man who wasn't physically there. The Helter Skelter motive offered a perfect solution. It transformed Manson into prophet and his followers into instruments, turning words into weapons and belief into a criminal act. But not everyone inside the district attorney's office agreed. Aaron Stovitz, the original lead prosecutor, expressed doubts about the theory's credibility and was removed from the case. Vincent Bugliosi took over, ambitious, intense, and determined to build a single story strong enough to win in court and in the court of public opinion. From that moment, the courtroom became a stage, and Bugliosi its author. He courted reporters, briefed television crews daily, and, even before the verdict, signed a contract ensuring his version would be the one the public remembered. That contract, signed while the jury was still hearing evidence, guaranteed him a national platform. The resulting book, Helter Skelter, would sell millions and define the case for generations. Colleagues later testified that Bugliosi's pursuit of publicity was relentless. For him, conviction and celebrity had become the same prize. The more sensational the motive, the better it worked. For the jury, for the cameras, and for the book that would soon follow. The Helter Skelter theory wasn't just courtroom strategy. It was the first draft of a bestseller. There's one question that still shadows this entire case. Why did the state need to tie Charles Manson to the murders at all? Legally, the answer was simple. Without him, the case would fall apart. The people who physically committed the killings, Watson, Atkins, Krenwinkel, Van Houten, were a loose collection of small-time criminals. Without a unifying hand to bind them, the prosecution faced 4 separate murders with no common motive. Conspiracy charges were the only way to make them one story. But politically, there was even more at stake. Los Angeles in 1969 was spiraling. Racial tension, riots, an unpopular war, a counterculture the establishment no longer understood. The city needed control, and the country needed a villain. When Manson appeared, wild-eyed, unrepentant, preaching chaos, he became the perfect symbol of everything Middle America feared. By making him the architect, the state could put the entire decade on trial. And then came personal ambition. Vincent Bugliosi didn't just need a conviction, he needed a legacy. A garden-variety drug killing wouldn't build one, but an apocalyptic race war, foretold by the Beatles and masterminded by a charismatic drifter? That was history, and a headline. So they built a case that demanded belief, not just evidence. A narrative large enough to convict every defendant and sanctify the man who prosecuted them. The Helter Skelter story wasn't created because it was true. It was created because it was useful. The early witness statements show no trace of apocalypse, but plenty of evidence of drugs. The victims at Cielo Drive were deeply entangled in Hollywood's narcotics economy. Jay Sebring, known in celebrity circles as the Candy Man, supplied cocaine to clients. Wojciech Frykowski used and dealt. Just hours before the murders, dealer Joel Rostow reportedly delivered mescaline and cocaine to the house. Meanwhile, the Manson family lived in that same underworld. A month earlier, on July 1st, 1969, Manson shot dealer Bernard Lotzapapa Crowe in a failed robbery. Believing Crowe dead and fearing retribution from the Black Panthers, Manson armed his followers and fortified Spahn Ranch. It was fear, not prophecy, that ruled them. That siege mentality explains far more than mysticism ever could. A band of criminals on the edge, watching their world collapse and striking out before someone else did. Weeks later, they rehearsed the pattern. On July 27th, Bobby Beausoleil, joined by Susan Atkins and Mary Brunner, tortured and killed Gary Hinman over a botched mescaline deal. Manson himself arrived mid-attack and slashed Hinman's face with a sword. When it was over, they scrawled "Political Piggy" on the wall in blood and added a Black Panther symbol, deliberate misdirection. Less than 2 weeks later, Beausoleil was arrested driving Hinman's car. The family panicked. One of their own was in jail and the trail led straight back to the ranch. 2 nights later came Cielo Drive. The next night, the LaBianca home on Waverly Drive. Both scenes repeated Hinman's staging. Words, blood, slogans. The timeline suggests no prophecy at all, only imitation and desperation. The crimes were copycat performances designed to confuse police and protect Beausoleil by creating the illusion of a political killing spree. When arranged chronologically, the logic is simple. July 1st, Manson shoots Crowe, fears revenge. July 27th, Hinman killed, scene staged with political graffiti. August 6th, Beausoleil arrested with Hinman's car and weapon. August 9th to 10th, Cielo Drive and the LaBianca home echo the same method. It's not mysticism, it's damage control. A failed musician facing humiliation, a drug crew under pressure, and a desperate attempt to muddy the evidence. The simpler story fit the facts, but not the courtroom. It could convict the killers who held the knives, but not the man who commanded them. The Helter Skelter theory solved that problem, stretching motive into ideology and ideology into conspiracy. It gave Bugliosi the through line he needed and the drama the public craved. The media rewarded it instantly. For a nation reeling from the end of the 60s, Helter Skelter turned confusion into closure. Manson became the face of a fallen generation, and Bugliosi became the man who stopped him. And so, the powerful, coherent narrative of Helter Skelter begins to show its cracks. We now have a new set of motives, grounded not in apocalyptic prophecy, but in the desperate realities of Los Angeles's criminal underworld. Drug burns, financial pressure, organized rivalries, and a chaotic copycat killing. Simpler, more logical explanations for the violence at Cielo Drive and Waverly. But as the evidence points one way, history points another. If these competing theories were known to investigators, why did Helter Skelter become the only story the world would ever hear? How did a small-time career criminal, who wasn't even at the crime scene, become the 20th century's icon of evil? In our next file, we'll examine how that transformation happened and who stood to gain from it. Because legends like this don't just appear, they're built. To make sure you don't miss our next investigation, please subscribe or follow the Fairshake Files on your favorite platform. This series is available as both a video documentary on YouTube and as a podcast on Spreaker, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and all major platforms. We welcome your thoughts. Leave a comment or a review to join the conversation. Thank you for watching and listening.